Welcome back to Talk the Walk with me, Sarah Wong. I'm with David Costello, Consul General of Ireland to Hong Kong and Macau. Thank you, David, for coming on Talk the Walk. So good to see you.
Likewise, Sarah, and thank you for wearing green today. It is noticed and appreciated.
We're discussing in part one about how COVID and the strict control and restrictions in Hong Kong here might have impacted the business interest and the long-term commitment for some of the Irish people who've been living here for many, many years. And I wonder, have you expressed any of that concern to Chief Executive Carrie Lam? And also, what kind of conversations and level of discussions are you having perhaps with the incoming leader, Mr. John Lee?
I mean, we talk all the time as much as we can with government figures here. In many ways, the decision seems to be a matter for here as well as the mainland, and it's a kind of combination of factors. And we fully understand that Hong Kong needs to balance the need to open the border to the mainland as well as opening the international border. The problem is, as the world moves on and as the mainland continues to pursue a COVID zero policy, it becomes a kind of a mutually exclusive choice. You can't do one and the other. So at some point, I think the incoming executive will have to make a decision on which way it's going. And clearly, I mean, the public health benefits from kind of social distancing and zero COVID strategy here is gone since the fifth wave. There's a degree of immune kind of defense built up in the population here that doesn't require the level of social distance measures that are on the mainland. And consequently, the decision around continuing social distances is one about satisfying the border requirements to open. And that's a matter for the government. It's not our place to tell the government what to do. The government's well capable of making its own decisions. But we're happy. We meet regularly. We met the chief executive recently a couple of weeks ago. We hosted a farewell. There was a farewell event with the diplomatic community he hosted, in which I was sitting beside her. We discussed some matters. And similarly, it's been a while since I've seen the incoming chief executive, but diplomats meet regularly with members of government, and I mean they're aware of our concerns. We're aware of theirs, and it's like I say, our job is not to be a political party in Hong Kong. We've no political role here, but we do have to represent our business interests here, and the business interests are on multiple levels. We should say, there are Irish people for whom Hong Kong is their home. They have businesses here, and they want to continue that business here, but for that all intents and purposes, that's a local Hong Kong business rather than an Irish investment. There are a lot of Irish business people that are working within kind of established business structures here, be it the large companies, CK Hutchinson, Jardines, whatever the case may be, HSBC in particular, where there's always been a huge Irish DNA. There's that kind of professional element. Big four companies all have Irish kind of partners working with them. And then there are Irish businesses that are investing in Hong Kong. And so that's the third level, So for those businesses trying to invest, those that are trying to export to Hong Kong, social distance is a huge barrier to access. And so for those businesses in particular, they have two jobs. Hong Kong is a gateway to the mainland, just like Ireland is a gateway to Europe. And post-Brexit, I should say, it's the only English-speaking common law country now in Europe, or the largest one. And so for Hong Kongers looking to go to Europe, the natural stepping stone is Ireland into Europe. And so for Irish businesses looking to invest in the mainland, a natural stepping stone is via Hong Kong. But for many of these businesses, they're also looking at Hong Kong as a regional Asian hub. And that requires them traveling minimum 8, 10, 12, 15 times a year for a lot of them. And because they do their business by meeting their customers in the region. They can't do that anymore because they can't come back and do a week's quarantine every time they travel. And so that is a huge factor in preventing Irish and European businesses continuing to operate Hong Kong as a regional hub. And so that's the challenge for the incoming government to deal with. Hong Kong will always have the mainland USP. but there's a real danger that it may lose its status as a regional business hub, and that's our concern if the current restrictions keep continuing. Certainly during 2020, 2021, there was no arguments. It was about protecting vulnerable populations. But those populations are vaccinated, and where there's been outbreaks of the scale that we saw here in the springtime, that the scale that we've seen throughout Europe over 2020 and 2021, the public health benefit of continued quarantine measures is questionable. That's a zero COVID policy, and that's a different strategy to protecting public health. But if there's a continuation of zero COVID strategies, then what will happen is businesses will split. Those that want to be here to trade into the mainland, or to do business in the mainland, or to have their presence here in terms of doing business in China, they'll stay here. But those that are needing to work in a regional Asian perspective won't, and they'll look to relocate to, be it Tokyo, Korea, Singapore, Dubai, all have featured largely in conversations that I've had with business people over the last 6 to 12 months.
Well, I heard that argument be made by so many people in the business community, but I wonder whether there's also a bright side to it. I wonder, despite all the hardship for Irish investment, for example, David, you've said before that to other publications that when you talk about Irish exports, you focus on 4 things: food, pharmaceuticals, finance, and IT. And I wonder, in terms of pharmaceuticals, right? Have you seen, by the same token, have you seen perhaps a rise in investment in Ireland's pharmaceuticals during the pandemic from Asia, from this part of the world?
Yeah, well, we're a highly globalized economy. I mean, Ireland and Hong Kong, they're almost like sister economies on the other side of the landmass of the European Asian landmass, and there's a lot of similarities in the way we do business. We're a small, open economy. We're highly globalized, highly internationalized. Ease of doing business in Ireland is extraordinarily easy, and this is part of our USP for attracting FDI. So we've consistently attracted the highest level of FDI per capita into Europe. We're one of the biggest destinations for American or US FDI overseas. And increasingly, we've been attracting some FDI out of China as well. So, yes, certainly it's been strange, even though there's been a global economic kind of contraction over the last couple of years because of the pandemic. Ireland's economy has actually grown. It's been an export-led growth economy for the last 2 years. Figures don't come to hand, but I know we're one of the very, very few countries in the European Union and indeed the world that has had economic growth in 2020 and 2021. And a lot of it was pharmaceutical driven as we were exporting pharmaceuticals in the world, around the world. For example, we are the global production center for Panadol. Or for, which is the paracetamol product by GSK, and in the last couple of years, there's been huge demand. Certainly, I know when I went to look for Panadol in February here, it wasn't to be found anywhere. So these are kind of some of the examples of how Ireland has been succeeding over the last couple of years.
In recent years, more campaign groups in the West have been lobbying their governments or other countries' government to adopt a tougher approach with China. For example, earlier this year, the head of the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong urged the Irish government to stop, quote, wink and nod, unquote, towards China. And I wonder how that kind of political gesture translate into policy or diplomacy change or not.
It's a challenging environment. Sadly, the more that we polarize, the more difficult it is to do business. So our job here as diplomats is to kind of build bridges and build relationships. That's what we're here to do, and to try and find ways of navigating ourselves through the kind of current crisis, be it pandemic or otherwise, So while we kind of respect and listen to various voices from civil society, the challenge is to build bridges. That's fundamentally what diplomacy is about, So our job here is to kind of encourage and build bilateral relations. In my case, with Hong Kong and Macau. With my ambassador's case, it's in Beijing. It's with the mainland government, and similarly, the Chinese embassy in Dublin does the same. The Hong Kong Economic Trade Office in Brussels and elsewhere does the same in terms of building economic kind of relationships. So that's our DNA. We need to kind of continue to build relationships, and kind of absolutism doesn't help us in the current climate.
All right, well, sir, we have to leave it there. David Costello, Consul General of Ireland to Hong Kong and Macau, thank you very much for coming on Talk the Walk to share your perspectives with us.
Great stuff. Thank you.